We begin, though, in Alberta, where the Premier is making big promises for the province's economic recovery. Jason Kenney says the plan he and his finance minister announced today will create 50,000 jobs through infrastructure funding and accelerate the creation of another 55,000 jobs through corporate income tax cuts. That cut from 10 to 8% wasn't supposed to fully take effect for a few more years, but it will now start Wednesday. Kenney says that move will send a signal to job creators to invest in Alberta. Have a listen.
The announcement today sends a startling message to business leaders across Canada and throughout North America that our commitment to have the lowest taxes for job creators isn't just some aspirational out there in the future BS target. It's real and it's right now.
So will this plan get Alberta's economy rolling again? How will the spending hit the province's coffers? Travis Taves is the province's finance minister. He joins us from Calgary. Hi, Minister. Good to see you again.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Thanks very much for making time. Minister, I heard you in your press conference today alongside Premier Kenney. The Premier and yourself both announced about $10 billion of spending on infrastructure to spur an economic recovery or help spur an economic recovery. You also said, though, as a result of the economic downturn, the government will forego, quote, billions of dollars in revenue. To be clear for people watching, you no longer plan on balancing the budget by 2022-23, correct?
Well, listen, balancing the budget remains an important objective for this government, but realistically, given the great economic challenge that we're experiencing now, it's very unlikely that we would be able to do that by 22-23. Right now, we're focusing on ensuring that we're delivering relief as required to Albertans and Alberta businesses, and that we're actually investing to see an economic recovery in the province.
The Premier echoed your thoughts in saying that it's still, or fiscal responsibility rather, still remains an important objective going forward. And in that vein, I wanted to get a sense from you about, I understand that we're in a very different phase of planning economically, obviously, right now. But once you're out of the pandemic, when it comes to, let's say, spending cuts, you know, there was a lot of concern prior to the pandemic that some of the cuts or decisions that your government had made. Are you planning on spending cuts in the future to hit those kinds of objectives that you just described?
Well, Vashi, our general fiscal plan and approach remains the same. As you recall, it consisted of two things. It consisted of ensuring that we were delivering government services in the most efficient manner. And given the fact that the McKinnon panel report found that Alberta is an outlier in its per capita cost of delivering services, we really need to do some work, and Budget 2019, Budget 2020 started us along the path of delivering government to Albertans in a much more efficient manner. At the same time, a big part of our plan to bring fiscal responsibility and ultimately balance the budget in this province was to grow our economy. And of course, we rolled out a series of key economic initiatives to do that, to broadly improve the business competitiveness of the province. And really, our announcement today just builds on that plan.
Okay, I want to ask you then about that plan and the idea of growing the economy, because it's predicated, one plank of it, at least on something you had previously announced, that's cuts to the corporate income tax rate. You've sped that up, and you were initially promising a gain of 55,000 jobs. I'm wondering now, since you're speeding the timeline up, what that does to the pledge for 55,000 jobs. How much will that speed up as well?
Well, listen, the 55,000 jobs was not a number that we came up with. That was a number that, very credible economists have concluded that, in fact, that type of a corporate income tax rate reduction from 12 to 8% would generate. So we really want to send a signal to the investment community, business community, that in fact, we will have and are intent on having the most competitive business environment possible. And so that's one reason why we're expediting our corporate income tax rate reduction from 10 to 8% immediately July 1st. But there was much more in the announcement today than that measure, although that measure is very important in and of itself. We're also, we announced a new innovation employment grant, which will ensure that Alberta is extremely competitive for tech and innovation activity. In fact, this particular mechanism will really reward incremental activity, and it fits very well with our preferential corporate income tax rate. We also announced that we're going to recapitalize the Alberta Enterprise Corporation, which is a fund that ultimately funds venture capital funds, which in fact invest in Alberta technology companies. And as you noted, Vashi, we are also investing in key infrastructure projects. We're expediting some infrastructure builds in the province, and these are projects that will improve our competitiveness, improve our productivity, and lead to long-term private sector investment and job creation.
And I do have questions about those announcements as well, but I do want to zone in on the corporate tax cuts, because I take your point on that was some of the analysis at the time, but today in the press conference, it was your government, it was the Premier who said that it would expedite the creation of 55,000 jobs. And I just want to know, in order to be able to hold your government to account as you roll out these promises, when you expect those 55,000 jobs to be created, because with all due respect, that didn't happen when you initially started the corporate tax cuts. In fact, the last 4 months of last year, there were job losses in the province.
Well, here's the other reality, though. Back in January and February of 2020, we were really seeing some positive economic indicators. And in fact, not only did we believe that 2020 was going to be a turnaround year for the economy in Alberta, when I look back at January and February economic data, it really demonstrates that we were going to see a real improvement in our economy, which would have led to additional job creation. So again, we're convinced that broadly improving the business environment in this province, improving the competitiveness of the business environment, will in fact attract investment and create jobs. And so, we remain convinced that that is the right policy to follow, and that's why we're expediting this corporate tax reduction.
Is the calculation at all a bit different, though, given the situation that we're in? And by that I mean, okay, so I'm a business, I get to pay the government less money in taxes, but I'm living in a very uncertain world right now where I don't know where the global economy is heading. We have a certain situation here in Canada. It's very different in the United States or in other countries. Am I for sure going to use that money to hire people? I mean, is that really something that you can say to Albertans will happen?
Well, listen, as you point out, there are many variables that contribute to growth or decline in an economy. What we're focusing on, Vashi, are the variables that we can manage and control. And so that's why, again, we're focusing on ensuring that we have the most competitive business environment possible, which a component of that is, of course, our corporate business tax rates in the province. Again, we have a very aggressive red tape reduction initiative where we're working to improve the regulatory environment, modernize the regulatory environment in this province, and we're ensuring that we can create a great foundation for the recovery by building key infrastructure projects, which will put Albertans to work today and in the short term, but again, maybe more importantly, in the long term, attract additional investment and create long-term great private sector jobs.
That spending on infrastructure, I couldn't find any details in the press release other than it'd be $10 billion and create, the press release said 32,000 jobs, but the Premier said 50,000 jobs. How many jobs is it, and over how long a period of time?
Sure. So this announcement builds off of our budget 2020, where we laid out a very significant capital spend of just under $7 billion. We're enhancing the infrastructure spend with today's announcement. There'll be more details to come on specific projects, but all told, with the $10 billion investment, the expectation is that will create an additional 50,000 jobs. The majority of those jobs within this upcoming year. Some of the projects, I'm sure, will fold and move into 2021. But we expect an immediate response with this type of investment. Again, we're focusing on projects that not only will improve our competitiveness and productivity, but projects that we can get implemented in the short term.
Sorry, could I ask you, Minister, to be a bit more specific? When you say the majority of those jobs will be this year, how much of that $10 billion you announced today is going to be spent this year? How many jobs do you expect that it will create? I'm asking you again because you didn't answer the question on 55,000 jobs with the corporate tax cut, for example, when those jobs might be created. And I feel like there are a lot of Albertans watching who are anxious to find out what your announcement means for them.
Sure. Well, on the 55,000 jobs, again, very credible economists have predicted by reducing our corporate tax rate from 12 to 8%, that would attract additional investment, which would create 55,000 new jobs. And so that's one reason why we're expediting the reduction in the corporate tax rate. The prediction was by 2022, that move would in fact create 55,000 additional jobs. Realistically, again, we would expect that a significant job creation in the upcoming months and years will be an outcome of that expedited move from 10 to 8% immediately. In terms of the infrastructure jobs, again, $7 billion was already earmarked in Budget 2020. And so those are projects that we've been planning for several months. Those are projects that will be initiated, and many of them have been initiated already. And so those are jobs that are already being created and will be created in the upcoming weeks and months. Again, we're topping that off with an additional $3 billion in infrastructure investment. The majority of that will be activity that will take place in 2020 and early 2021.
So the new part of this spending announcement today on infrastructure at least is $3 billion. Is that correct?
That's right. It takes our Budget 2020 $7 billion spend and adds effectively approximately $3 billion to it.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Minister. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Vashi.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.